Today, there was news of a possible high-level visit to Iran by a U.S. emissary. Senator John Kerry, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said that he is willing to go to Tehran in a last-ditch diplomatic effort as a U.S. deadline for sanctions against Iran looms. The White House says it wouldn't oppose Kerry's trip. It is unclear whether Iran would welcome such a visit. And that brings us to this week's roundtable, which focuses tonight on Iran. And joining us are Carol Giacomo, a member of the New York Times editorial board, and Ershad Manji, a professor at New York University and the author of The Trouble with Islam Today. Welcome to both of you. Nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
So what do you make, Carol, of the ongoing discontent against the regime, which tends to continue despite the very heavy security crackdown?
I think it definitely tells you that there's a lot more unhappiness and opposition to the regime than the regime would have you believe. I think it suggests serious problems for the government there, and I think it's a very positive thing for Iran that people are speaking out and having the courage to speak out, even though many of them have been jailed and some of them have been tortured and killed.
Yeah, it seems as if the opposition, the democratic opposition, is being systematically eviscerated.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the regime is trying to systematically eviscerate the democratic opposition, but not having very much progress right now because Carol mentioned that, a number of dissidents have already been jailed. Well, just last Saturday, the government, in effect, admitted that it had tortured some of these prisoners over the summer to the point of killing them. This announcement, Daljeet, actually signals a certain humbling on the part of the regime. And then only hours later, this announcement was followed by the death of Grand Ayatollah Montazeri, who was in effect the spiritual voice of the democratic opposition, but maybe wielding more influence from the grave than he ever did in his earthly life, in that more and more clerics are now beginning to join the opposition. And by the way, all of this is happening during a very meaningful moment in the Shia Islamic calendar, the month of Muharram, and in particular on Sunday, the day of Ashura, which is the day that Shia Muslims around the world commemorate the martyrdom of Prophet Muhammad's grandson, a man who went into battle knowing that he would be killed, but did so anyway because he believed that challenging injustice and oppression was more important than living a long earthly life. This is the paradigm for the opposition.
But do you think that these protests within that context of Ashura could spiral out of control?
Certainly they could spiral out of control. They could also lead to some great change in Iran. I mean, when you look back at the '79 revolution, there are certain parallels where the movement continued to build, in part because people came out to demonstrate on days such as Ashura. So right now the regime has a lot of control mechanisms and they're exercising them to the hilt, but the people keep coming out onto the street.
In Shia Islam, the great achievement is a moral victory, not an actual victory. And what these protesters are showing is that they're wanting to move beyond the morality play to transcend martyrdom and turn it into real freedom. This is what we have to look for.
But the opposition movement doesn't have the structure that it did in 1979 at the time of the Islamic Revolution. What are your thoughts in terms of the
one
scope?
Leader right now, like Ayatollah Khomeini was at that time. So that's a real problem for them in terms of political clout. And Montazeri certainly is an inspiration, and his legacy and his ability to challenge the regime on religious credentials is very significant. But without an actual human being to rally around, it is a difficult problem.
Well, let's move on to another issue in Iran, international scrutiny of its nuclear program. Do you think that a deal with the West is still viable?
I have my doubts, to be very honest. Now, as I said earlier, there is more humility on the part of the Iranian regime today than there has been in a number of months. So you never know what deal might be struck. But the reality is that, President Obama himself is coming to see that the Democratic opposition is something that he needs to invest more of his rhetoric in. In fact, he mentioned them during his Nobel speech for, I think, the first time since his presidency.
Do you think our engagement has been way too one-dimensional?
It hasn't been terribly effective, is really the point for me.
I mean, it's very difficult to engage with somebody who doesn't really want to play ball with you. And right now, this internal dissension within Iran is sort of focusing the attention of the leadership. So but it's always been a long shot whether or not the Iranians would be willing to have any kind of deal, or this Iranian regime would have any deal with the United States.
Would Senator John Kerry's going to Iran, as he has offered to do, make a difference?
Could do. I mean, he's a senior government official. He had some success going to talk to President Karzai in Afghanistan, but it's an important gesture by the United States to show that it's going to go to the, nth degree to try to have some kind of a diplomatic solution.
Right, and the great rumor actually that is spreading among the dissidents in Iran right now is that Obama is cutting a deal with the Ahmadinejad government, recognizing their legitimacy in exchange for some kind of a bargain on the nuclear issue. These dissidents are not happy about that. They are looking to America, which they still see as the beacon of hope, to give them support in order to push their reform efforts over the top.
And just very briefly, that deadline, the US imposed deadline for sanctions is coming up. It's at the end of the year. Where do you see this issue going? Very briefly, Carol.
I mean, Obama can't completely just disengage from this deadline, but the whole MO of the United States and its allies has been to try to keep the dialogue going however they can. And I think that's what they'll do.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think economic sanctions are going to have to toughen against the regime. And the trick will be, how do you punish the regime without punishing the people of Iran?
All right, Ershad Manji, thank you very much. Carol Giacomo, good to see you again.
Good to see you.